The roof tar had gone soft in the heat, and the whole building smelled of warm asphalt and coconut. That was the first thing. The second thing was that I had been caught looking, and there is no version of the 4 seconds that follow being caught looking that a person can win. I was up there to tighten a bolt on the railing. She was up there to vanish into a paperback in the last of the afternoon. I had promised myself I would be up and down in under a minute, and I had believed it, right until she lowered the book, found me already looking, and did not look away. I want to be precise about this, because the word staring does me no favors. I was not looking the way the word suggests. I was looking the way you look at a thing you have decided, for 3 careful months, to stop noticing. She let the quiet run 1 beat too long. Then she held out a bottle of sunscreen and said, "Since you're up here, can you get my back?" My name is Daniel Hart. I'm 34, and I restore furniture for a living, sanding, joinery. The slow rescue of things other people have written off, out of a converted ground floor unit in a building where the walls are thin enough to have opinions. I am good with my hands, and less good with almost everything that isn't a chair. I live alone, which I mostly experience as quiet rather than absence, and I had arranged my life so that the loudest thing in it was a belt sander. Her name was Nora Fenn. She lived directly above me, which is a geography I felt more than I understood. She taught secondary school biology, though I only learned that later. What I knew first was that she kept impossible hours in summer, watered a balcony full of tomatoes at dusk, and read the same battered paperback across the entire month of July without, as far as I could tell, ever turning past the middle. The cover was held together with a hair tie. She read it the way some people keep a candle lit, not for the light exactly, for the fact of it. We had met, if you can call it that, over a note. 3 months earlier, she had slid a folded square under my door, the 7A. M. Sanding, I teach. I need the sleep. 4B. Since then, we had been scrupulously, arctically polite. A nod at the post boxes. A morning with the temperature carefully removed. I had moved my loud work to 9 and told myself the matter was closed. This is the thing about closing a matter. It only stays closed if nobody keeps checking the door. So I understood, standing on that roof with the bottle held out toward me, that something had come slightly loose, and that I did not have reliable instincts where loose things involving Nora Fenn were concerned. I took the sunscreen. The heat came up off the tar through the soles of my shoes, and somewhere below a bus exhaled at a stop. She had turned back around and gathered her hair off her neck, and she said, not looking at me, "You do this for a living, apparently. Careful things with your hands. Should be within your range." "You wrote me a formal complaint," I said. "Now you're trusting me with sun protection. I'm having trouble with the through line." "The complaint was about 6:40 in the morning," she said. "This is a different jurisdiction." I put the sunscreen on the back of her shoulders and worked it in the way you'd handle something that had a grain to it, and I kept my attention very deliberately on the mechanics, because the mechanics were survivable and the rest of it was not. She had a small scar under her left shoulder blade, thin and old. I did not ask. You do not get to ask about the scar of a woman who filed paperwork against your sander. "You missed a bit," she said. Left, I did not miss a bit. "I'm being thorough. You're being slow. Same thing, done properly." That earned a sound that was almost a laugh, 1 note, quickly recalled, as if she'd caught it trying to leave without permission. And here is the moment I want to mark, because it's the one that mattered and it looked like nothing. She reached back, took the bottle out of my hand, and instead of packing it away, she set it down on the towel between us. Between. Not in her bag. Not on her side. She did it with slightly too much care. like a person deciding something and not wanting to be seen deciding it. I have replayed that afternoon more times than I'll admit to. Not because anything happened. Because that was the moment the note under the door stopped being the last true thing that had passed between us, and I felt the whole arrangement I'd built, the 9 o'clock start, the temperature-free mornings, the closed matter, go quietly out of date. "Thanks," she said, and it came out even. Too even. The evenness was the tell. I went back downstairs and did not tighten the bolt on the railing. I noticed this an hour later when I realized I had spent that hour not thinking about the railing with an intensity that should have been a warning. I'd like to report that I handled the following days with the composure of an adult man who owns his own clamps. What I actually did was become an amateur meteorologist. I started knowing when it would be hot. I started, on hot afternoons, finding small structural reasons to be on the roof, a gutter to check, a loose flashing. The railing bolt I had by then tightened, loosened, and tightened again purely to keep my alibi in stock. And she was there, most times, with the paperback open to the same middle page. We talk the way you talk when both people are pretending the talking is incidental. Tomatoes. The heat. The neighbor on the second floor who watered his plants at 3 a.m. like a man with something to atone for. This was not a sound decision. I was making it anyway. It was on the 4th or 5th of these non-appointments that the first real crack showed, and it showed in her. And she didn't mean it to. She was telling me about a student, a kid who'd failed a module twice and asked to sit it a third time, and how she'd stayed late to help him. And I said something offhand about her being softer than the note under my door had led me to believe. And she said, "Too fast. I'm only hard about the things that cost me something. Sleep costs me something." Then, a half-second later, quieter, watching the tomatoes and not me, and I sleep badly under people I'm trying not to think about. She heard herself say it after she'd said it. I watched it land on her. She set the paperback down with slightly too much care. Neither of us moved for a moment. A pigeon negotiated the railing. That, I said carefully, is a sentence with a lot of doors in it. "It's the heat," she said. "It makes me editorial." Not because it was the heat. Because she'd run out of the energy it takes to keep a thing folded. I want to be honest about what I did with that, which is that I built a small, sturdy shed of denial and moved in. It was the heat. It was the roof. It was the peculiar intimacy of two people who share plumbing and a stairwell and nothing else. Mistaking proximity for meaning. People do it constantly. I had watched people do it. I told myself I was too observant to be one of those people, which, I'll note for the record, is precisely the sentence one of those people says. That is not self-knowledge. That is self-knowledge wearing a very good coat. I did the maths I do on everything I don't want to feel. I told myself she was simply warmer than the note had led me to expect, and that I was mistaking the relief of being wrong about someone for something larger. I told myself I'd got used to the sound of her floor the way you get used to any sound. I told myself the tomatoes were her being neighborly. Each of these was individually plausible, and collectively a wall I was building at speed, one plausible brick at a time, to keep from looking at the thing on the other side of it. The trouble with a wall you build that fast is that you can see the light coming through the gaps. Because the truth was accumulating, the way water finds a low place. And once I stopped being able to lie about the flood, I could not stop counting the evidence. There was the paperback. I finally saw the title one afternoon when the wind flipped it shut. A novel about a woman who spends a summer deciding whether to leave the flat below the man she has feelings for. She had been not finishing it for a month. She had been not finishing it, I understood, the way you keep a door propped when you're not sure whether you want it open. There was the tomatoes. She'd started leaving 2 of them on my windowsill, on the ledge outside the glass, without a note. The first time I thought a bird had done something ambitious. The third time I stopped thinking it was a bird. There was the noise. My 9 o'clock start had become, without discussion, a 9 o'clock start she was awake for. I'd hear the floor above me shift and settle around the time I turned the sander on. A person deliberately keeping company with a sound she'd once filed a grievance against. She had gone, in 3 months, from complaining about the noise I made to organizing her morning around it. I am slow, but I am not a stone. And then there was the Tuesday she knocked. 9 at night, a soft double knock, and when I opened the door she was holding a jam jar and an explanation she'd assembled somewhere on the stairs. The lid was stuck. She couldn't get purchase. I was good with my hands, apparently. I opened it in about a second and a half. Because it was not, in any meaningful sense, stuck, we both looked at the jar. We both understood that the jar was not the reason. She took it back and said, "Thank you." That was, "Yes, thank you," and went back up too quickly, the way you leave a room after you've heard yourself say more than you brought into it. She had come down 3 flights to have me open a jar she could have managed with a tea towel. I stood in my doorway, holding that piece of information like it was warm. This was, I want to be clear, mounting evidence, and my response to mounting evidence was to file it neatly and reach no conclusion. That is not a lack of feeling. That is a feeling with much better paperwork than most feelings get. And there was the evening her sister came to visit. I passed them on the stairs, introductions, the polite choreography of a landing, and as I went down I heard the sisters say, in the carrying half-whisper of people who forget how sound travels in a stairwell, "So, that's him. The furniture one. You weren't exaggerating." And I heard Nora say, "Don't," in a voice that was not a denial. It was the voice of someone guarding a thing precisely because it's real. I stood on the landing below theirs longer than the situation required. I was considering whether the banister was load-bearing, and whether I was. Nora Fenn, who had once put in writing that I disrupted her sleep, had apparently been describing me to her sister with enough color to warrant a don't. I went into my flat and stood in the dark of my own hallway and tried to decide whether my grasp of the situation had become unreliable, or whether it had, for the first time in months, become accurate. It was the second one. That is not the comforting interpretation. It's the one that was true. The heat broke on a Thursday, which is a stupidly ordinary day for anything to happen on. There was a storm coming, that green, held breath light that comes before summer rain, and the smell of it on the hot pavement rising up while the first fat drops hit the tar. I went up to bring in a tarp I'd left over some timber, and she was already up there, gathering the towel and the sunscreen and the paperback against the wind. And neither of us went down. We stood under the little overhang by the stairwell door as the rain came properly, loud on the roof, the temperature dropping in a way you could feel on your arms. For a while we said nothing at all. This is the part I would keep if I could only keep one part. Not because anything was said, because nothing had to be. And the not having to felt like a room we'd both been trying to get into for a season. She stood close enough that I could feel the warmth still coming off her arm where the sun had been all afternoon, and the rain sheeted down 2 feet in front of us and did not touch either of us. And there was a smell of wet dust and coconut and the green of the storm all at once. I watched her watch the rain. She had the particular stillness of a person managing something, the chin set, the breath measured, the paperback held to her chest with both hands the way you hold a thing you're deciding whether to put down. Neither of us reached for the door. That was the whole conversation, for a while. Two people declining, at the same moment, to go back inside. I have thought since that this is the most honest either of us had been in 3 months, and we did it entirely with our feet. The rain smelled like the whole summer ending. Then she said, "To the rain, not to me. I told you I came up here to read. You did. I don't read up here." A pause. The book pressed a little tighter. I've been on the same page since June. I looked at the book and then at her, and did not say anything clever, which for me is a form of exertion. "I come up when I hear you on the roof," she said. "That's the reason. I wanted you to know the actual reason, because I'm tired of the other ones." Something in the air between us changed weight. I felt it in my chest first, a specific tightening, the body reaching the conclusion a beat ahead of the language, the way it always does. I looked at her, and she was looking very hard at the middle distance, her hands still around a book she'd never once finished, her composure legible entirely in the small places it was failing, the too quick breath, the stillness of her fingers, the way her chin had set as if bracing. I could have let that sit. I could have made it easy for both of us by making it smaller, and I understood, standing there, that the kindest thing and the truest thing were for once the same thing, and that I had to say the next part carefully. "Nora," I said, "you don't have to finish that, any of it. We can go back down, and this can't have been the storm. I'll bring your tomatoes in, and I won't say a word about any of it, and we'll be the two people who nod at the post boxes. If that's the version you want, it's yours. Just tell me." That was the whole of it. That was the door, held open, the exit made plain. I have learned that you cannot make a person brave. You can only make it safe enough that they might choose to be. The rain went on. She didn't move toward the stairs. "No," she said. Quietly, the biggest word she'd said all summer, and she said it like the smallest. "I don't want that version. I've had that version since June, and I've hated every page of it." So I told her the truth, and I tried to make it specific, because she was worth more than a sentence anyone could have said to anyone. "I stopped thinking of this building as where I live," I said. "Sometime around the second tomato, I started thinking of it as the place you were upstairs. I moved my whole day so I'd be making noise when you were awake to hear it. I've tightened the same bolt on that railing 11 times. There is nothing wrong with that railing. There has never been anything wrong with that railing." She laughed then, the real one, the one she didn't perform, that came out a note too high and didn't care. 11, she said. I stopped counting at 11 so I could keep the number dignified. She turned to face me properly for the first time, and the rain was loud, and she reached out and took a fistful of the front of my shirt, not pulling, just holding, the way you hold something to make sure it's real, and she said, "You put sunscreen on my back for 6 minutes in July like it was a joinery inspection. Do you know how long 6 minutes is? I was being thorough. You were being slow. And then it was very simple, the way the hardest things are simple once the person you were afraid of has decided they're on your side." I put my hand against the side of her face, and she leaned into it, and I kissed her under the overhang with the whole summer coming down around us, gently, because there was no reason on earth to hurry a thing that had already taken 3 months and 11 bolts to arrive. Below us, 3 floors down, a door banged open, and the 3 in the morning man's voice sailed up the stairwell, aggrieved and enormous. "Whose towel is on my tomatoes?" Nora put her forehead against my collarbone and started laughing, the paperback still crushed between us. And I stood there in the rain, holding a woman who was laughing too hard to explain the towel, and I thought, This is the version I want. The one with the shouting neighbor in it. 6 weeks later, we had settled into the careful, ridiculous tenderness of two people learning to carry a thing they'd spent a season pretending not to hold. She still corrected my grammar. I still overestimated how long I could go without coffee. She slid notes under my door, except now they said things like, "Tomatoes ready. Bring the good knife." And I kept every one of them in a drawer I did not tell her about for a long time. By the time autumn came, she was doing her marking at my workbench while I glued up a cabinet. The two of us in the wood smell and the lamplight, arguing amiably about a student who'd asked to resit a module a fourth time. The building was the same building. The stairwell was the same stairwell. The only thing that had changed was that when I heard her floor shift and settle above me in the mornings, I no longer had to pretend it was just a floor settling. She finished the paperback in October. I asked her how it ended. She said the woman stays. Then she looked at me over the top of it and didn't say anything else because she didn't need to. Now, when people ask how it started, she tells them a downstairs neighbor was standing on the roof pretending to fix a railing and got caught staring and blushed so hard she could see it from across the tar. And I tell them she handed a man she'd filed a formal noise complaint against a bottle of sunscreen and asked him to do her back, which is either the beginning of a lawsuit or the beginning of a life, and we got lucky about which. We both leave out the part where I'd already moved my whole day around her sound. She leaves out the part where she'd been on the same page since June. Some of it we keep, not because it's secret, because it's ours. It was not new. In the end, it had probably always been exactly this. Sitting there under 3 months of careful politeness, waiting for a hot enough afternoon, and one person brave enough to hand the other something and not pack it away. It felt late. The very best kind of late. So, what would you have done if the neighbor you'd been trying not to think about caught you looking on a rooftop and handed you the sunscreen? Would you have been thorough, or would you have run? And have you ever kept yourself carefully, deliberately polite to someone? Nods at the post boxes, the temperature filed off your good mornings, precisely because the truth felt too big to hold in a stairwell? Tell me in the comments. I read them. If this one stayed with you, a like and a subscribe means I'll keep making them, and I'll see you in the next one.